You wander the ruins of a long-lost Gondorian city. And you think to yourself, man, it'd be sick to have one of these at home. Well, come with me. Because today on the Wizard's Brush, we're making Gondor Ruins. I've picked up these two sets, one from a local hobby store and one from the internet, which by this point has really caught on. These boxes are supposed to be incredibly modular, so we're going to be testing that out today, and we'll see how far we can push it. Let's gather our weapons. We'll need a clipper, seam line remover, a bit of sandpaper, some glue, and maybe a file. The first ruin we're going to do by the book and respect the instructions. We've got to get everything off the sprue and all of the pieces cleaned up. We absolutely do not have to clean up every surface, but I want to, and I'm gonna, okay? The build process takes a little bit longer than I'm used to with these plastic kits, but I think this is down to the brilliance of the modular design. We can build this in so many ways, but because of that, we've got a lot more pieces to work with. We're going to need PVA, this brush, clay, and some isopropyl, because we're making bases. I had these plywood bases hanging around from another project, and we're going to spread some PVA on them so the clay will adhere. We'll also need a rolling pin. Yes! Let's get the clay on the bases. We're going to have to spray everything with isopropyl, including the clay, so nothing gets stuck together as we flatten it down onto the base. We're going to need to use our hands as well to really spread it out. Personally, I find this process very satisfying. We're going to use a texture roller here to create a flagstone effect. Definitely spray that with isopropyl or it will get stuck in there. And we're going to use this elven texture one as well alongside the flagstone. We're on to the second build and I'm going completely off-road with this one and imagining up a completely different design. This is where the modularity of the set really comes into its own, because every time I thought, oh no, I can't build it this way, I found a way to do it. I had some pieces left over on the sprue, so I thought, do you know what? Let's treat myself. I'm going to make another small ruin and have some rubble left over. Lovely. The bases and the ruins are built. It is time to prime. First priming up with a matte black. And zenithal prime with a glorious grey, and then finishing off with this Rust-Oleum white. Sorry. It's time for leopard spotting. Leopard spotting is one of those process trust exercises. It looks absolutely awful at first, but then in the following steps, it's gonna look fantastic, please trust me. We're starting here with Beltan green, before moving on to Agrax Earthshade, and some Reichland Flesh Shade. As the name suggests, I'm building up spots of each colour. Onto Zealot Yellow. This seems like a strange choice at first, but if you look at most stonemasonry, roofs for instance, they have this build-up of yellow algae, and this is meant to represent that. Now we seal the deal with an overall black wash and start to dry brush up with this skeleton bone. This makes a massive difference. You can see here one without and one with the dry brushing. It starts to really look like stone. There is something very satisfying about dry brushing terrain, especially after you've leopard spotted, because it does tend to look absolutely horrendous at first. As you can see, things are starting to really come together. Using an acrylic brown, we're going to dry brush over all of the wooden elements. And then bring back some contrast with Agrax Earthshade. I was going through some old Lord of the Rings boxes and I found this campsite scatter terrain. It'll add a bit of realism. Here it is in the centre of the shot. I'm going to use this chainmail silver to go over all of the metal parts on the door and on the campsite scatter terrain. We're going to do some rust effects with Dirty Down's Rust, which is absolutely amazing. You've got to shake it loads, put it in your pocket, this will warm it up. Very important. And it's got all this goopy stuff inside, so you've got to really mix it as well. That's the important step. That stuff there, yeah. You want that to be mixed in as much as possible. That's where all the goodness is. Please don't eat this stuff, it is absolutely toxic. Dirty Down's Rust loves to be warm, so I like to preheat the surface with a hairdryer, and as it dries, as the name suggests, it looks just like rust. Now you could stop at this point and it would be perfectly acceptable scatter terrain.
You could maybe add some dust or mud or greenery, but we're going to take it further than that. We're going to smoothen the edges of the bases using a palm sander and create a bit of a gradient and a bevel on the edges. Now we're going to prime them using a matte black, and we're going to zenithal with a primer grey, but we're going to do this horizontally so it picks out the details of the cobblestone, and the same with this Rust-Oleum white. Now leopard spotting again, and we're going to use a brown to dry brush in some mud, and then skeleton bone for all of the stonework. Then a black wash, then another dry brush of skeleton bone. Now it's time to glue this down to the bases. I've tried a few variations of this and I've decided on this one, and I'm just using a kebab skewer to make sure they're pretty much lined up so that there's a realistic footprint for the buildings. Found these bits of rubble that I'm going to add just to add a little bit more realism to this collapsed bit of floor in the center. So I've glued that in. Now I'll need to prime that using this paint on primer. I'm going to dry brush up with this grey, leopard spot, and then finally dry brush again with skeleton bone. My stepson Harry's popping in here with the PVA glue. Look at the style, wielding this brush like a sword. Pot full of mud, various basing materials, 6mm tufts, and a small tub full of small red leaves, and I'll be handling the isopropyl. First of all, we'll be liberally applying this PVA glue, and then moving on to all of the mud, and then tile grout for a lighter tone of sand and dust, and then starting to build up the greenery. Now I want to start building up rocks and dust and mud up against the edges of the buildings. And Geek Gaming Scenic's arid grasslands is full of little bits of grass and rocks and mud, so this really works well for that. Building up even more greenery on the masonry itself. Now I'm concentrating on the ridges and arches. Now I'm adding these red leaves, not likely to the leaves of Lorien Fall, except these ones obviously. Now I'm creating some holes so I can glue in these trees that I found, and I'll add an extra level of treeism. And then I was just staring at it for a while and I was like, twigs, it needs twigs. Yes, glue the twigs on, let's do twigs. And nothing makes a ruin like a creeping vine, so let's glue one of those on. And now I'm using tile grout to add some dust coming out from the windows. And it's done. 2 Gondorian ruins scatter pieces. They can be used in all sorts of different ways. You can use it for Middle-earth games, or perhaps Dungeons & Dragons, Warcry, Age of Sigmar. It'll work. If you've made it this far into the video, please consider subscribing now. Thank you very much. And a massive thank you to everyone that's subscribed. This channel's only been up for a couple of weeks, so I really appreciate it. You're back in the Gondorians, is it? Hang on a minute, this is just my living room. Oh yeah. Okay, well, fair enough.